management, and more specifically, how CFOs can drive business efficiency and growth. Before I begin, I'd like to extend my appreciation to the organizers for their invitation. And my 20-slide presentation, I've got 20 minutes to present, right, will be covering, number one, a brief overview of Nestlé, number two, our strategic roadmap, and lastly, most importantly, how our finance organization supports all of these strategies. So let me see how this works here. Okay, maybe a little history about Nestlé to start off. Before getting into the core of the presentation, maybe a few facts. I'm not sure how many of you know, but the founder of Nestlé was a Swiss gentleman whose name was Henry Nestlé. And over 140 years ago, he invented a milk-based food for his neighbor's baby who could not breastfeed. And without food, the baby was going to die. So he invented a food product which eventually was successful in saving the child's life. And eventually this product turned out to be a very big commercial success. Nestlé, a few key facts about the company worldwide. As I mentioned to you, it was founded over 140 years ago, and the company has grown tremendously. We represent about 450 factories. We're present in 83 countries, about 280,000 people worldwide, over 2,000 distribution centers. We've got very well-staffed R&D centers, and we obviously own a strong portfolio of brands and innovation, which we drive throughout every year. Now, we are the recognized and leading nutrition, health, and wellness company worldwide, and we have over 110 billion Swiss francs in sales, and our organic growth has been 6.2% in 2010. My financial responsibilities cover both Malaysia and Singapore, so here are some facts on our presence in this region. We've been around for close to 100 years now, and we are a leading halal food manufacturer regionally. We employ over 5,500 people, 1.4 billion Swiss in sales, and we're publicly listed in Malaysia since 1989. We produce locally as well. We have 7 factories in Malaysia, 1 factory here in Singapore. And we basically cover the entire portfolio of Nestlé throughout all categories at Nestlé, which include coffee and beverage. You probably know about Nescafé, about Milo, food, Maggi products, milks, infant nutrition, healthcare, performance nutrition, chilled ice cream, confectionery, etc., etc. As you would expect, if I could get the next slide. So by turning the on button helps. So as you would expect, actually, let me go back to this one here. Here is a very important document for us at Nestlé, and we're talking about the role of finance in driving business efficiency and growth. And obviously, to achieve this objective, we as CFOs need to be aligned with the overall business strategy of our company. And what I'm showing you now here on screen is the strategic roadmap of Nestlé. The beauty of this single page is that it contains everything one needs to know about Nestlé's strategy. If you look at the gray circle in the middle, it basically depicts Nestlé's ambition. We want to be the recognized nutrition, health, and wellness company worldwide, and we want to be the industry reference for financial performance. This ambition, you will notice, is supported by 3 key concepts located at the edge of this gray circle. Number 1 is culture and values, sustainability and compliance, as well as creating shared value. Now, I'm not going to elaborate on the first 2, but just a few comments on creating shared value. What this is Nestlé's approach to corporate social responsibility. And it's focused on the concept that for companies to be successful in the long term, they need to provide value for their shareholders as well as for society at large. And just as a side note, there was a very good article in the Harvard Business Review a few months ago on creating shared value. I think it's a very, very good read. Anyways, how Nestlé will achieve this ambition is through the enablers, which are represented here in these three groups of colored circles. Starting from the top is the green circles, and this is about competitive advantages. We have several of these. Obviously, a key one is our products and brands, very strong worldwide brands. We've got key R&D capabilities. We obviously are present geographically worldwide. And lastly, not least, is our people, culture, and values. Turning clockwise to the orange circles, this is our next enabler, and that is our growth drivers: nutrition, health, and wellness. Also what we call the PPP, popularly positioned products, which are affordable, nutritious products, which are aimed towards the low-income consumers in the world. We are obviously focused on out of home as well as premiumization. Lastly, the last enabler, the blue circles, represent our operational pillars. They include our I&R capability, our operational efficiencies, consumer communication, etc. Again, this single page provides a very, very good perspective on the strategic direction of Nestlé. And as a finance organization, we have a big role to play to ensure that we drive these strategies and we drive profitable growth. So, if I move on to our finance mission statement, how does this link into our strategies? As you would expect, our mission statement for finance ties in directly with the previous slide I shared. We drive sound business decision making and innovation planning to optimize the group's long-term profitable growth, cash flow, and total return to shareholders. Now, we do this by embracing the role of change agents, and we drive long-term value creation and at the same time ensuring high standards of stewardship and governance throughout the company. Now, I borrowed a few concepts from a KPMG document which I read recently. And basically, in these comments, it highlights the fact that a high-performance finance organization is strongly correlated to a high-performance business. Finance influences business leaders by leveraging trust and by providing relevant information to ensure good decision-making. So, how do we do this? Number one, the first enabler is a good finance structure in the organization. And without the right structure, you cannot provide the organization with the right support. Now, at Nestlé, we have organized our finance teams according to what we call the House of Finance. And as you see here, it's structured in different pillars. The first pillar to the left is what we call the co-pilots, who provide business decisions to their business partners. They work directly in the businesses and in the functions. And basically what these people are, there are many CFOs within these operations. They have a solid line to the business decision manager in these businesses or functions, and a dotted line to the CFO. The second pillar represents the specialist services, and basically the tax people, the audit people, treasury, pension, etc., etc. These are the specialized functions within our organization. Moving on to the third pillar, the scalable business services. Mostly shared services, we optimize our resources and our processes for transactional and less transactional items. And lastly, the last pillar is decision support services, where we have teams providing costing support, reporting, conservation, central planning, etc. So all these pillars represent how we are organized structurally within Nestlé. Now, at the basis of these pillars, we recognize a certain number of foundations. You shouldn't be surprised: people, governance and stewardship, and business excellence, which is what we call best practices. house has a roof, and this roof is focused on what? Driving profitable growth. So this structure is certainly a key enabler for us to be efficient and effective in the organization. Another key enabler is obviously the strength of our people. And these people represent our key assets in the company. Now, we aspire to be a high-performing company, and we do this by providing a positive environment where our people thrive, and where, most importantly, we can develop them and we can grow them. Now, all these themes converge to one key goal, which is capability development. At Nestlé, we obviously have succession planning, we have coaching, we have all these things. But one thing which I'd like to highlight is something we've introduced a couple of years ago, is that for each finance position, we have what we call a job success profile. Now, it's not a job description. The job description is task-focused. This job success profile is different in the sense that it lists all the key outputs which are expected from a person in a position. But more importantly, it defines the leadership and functional skills which are required to be successful in that position. Now, that is important because it allows us obviously to better assess how we can get people in these roles, in the position, but more importantly, it allows us also to specifically work on what development plans are needed by our individuals in these key finance positions. So that is very, very important. And within our organization, the role of any finance manager who supervises people is to develop his or her team members. So this would be the second enabler. The next enabler relates more to, I guess, a process. We talked about two enablers so far, right? Structure and people. I'd like to talk to you about efficient and effective planning processes. And you can look at them, these processes, based in two different buckets, I would say. The first one is a long-term strategy, obviously. And the second one is more short-term focused and more execution focused, which is what we call dynamic forecasting, which is basically a forecasting and planning process, which I will talk about in the next few slides. Obviously, in these processes, the financial teams have a key role to play. Now, it all starts with what we call a market business strategy, which is a long-term plan, if you will. Within our company, we've actually changed a little bit our approach. We had a fairly involved, pretty heavy long-term planning process in the past. We've reduced that somewhat to something more, something leaner, I would say, and certainly much more easier to use and to refer to on a yearly basis. We're very much tied into our planning processes on a yearly basis. But I don't want to spend too much time on the strategic planning process. I'd like to spend more time on what cascades down from this long-term plan. And more specifically, I'd like to talk to you about dynamic planning and forecasting, of which I'm going to describe a few components. We heard this morning from the panel the fact that we as financial professionals, it's not about the numbers really, it's more about what's behind the numbers. And I think that we've evolved somewhat to manage numbers to a position now where we are managing the business, we are co-leading the business in some areas. So to enable us to do this, there are a certain number of things and processes which we put in place as part of this dynamic forecasting, which I think have helped us in this journey. The first concept which I would like to share with you is that our experience has been that to translate strategies into priorities and targets takes time, and it's something which seems easy at first, but it's not. And linking these strategic directions with key measures and targets within the organization is a very, very important process. Linked to priority and target setting is the establishment of KPIs. We all know that KPIs need to be measurable, trackable, actionable, timely. People need to be accountable, they need to be prioritized, and simple. That last word, simple, is a keyword. And as you know, it's not always that simple. At Nestle, what we have achieved over time is that we've cascaded down KPIs throughout the organization. And this requires discipline, focus, a lot of efforts, but it is worthwhile investment. The concept is that these KPIs need to be established in a way that allows every individual in the organization to have a direct impact or direct influence on the KPI he or she manages. Very important. And again, this is a very simple concept, but to do it right is not easy. Once these KPIs are in place and are set, and once we have a good tracking to measure our performance versus these KPIs, we have the measurement of the progress, which happens in our organization through very specific, dedicated review meetings, which allow us to leverage dashboards, look at performance measures, and these meetings are usually short and crisp and action-oriented. They're not focused on the numbers, they're focused on the trends. It's more management by exception. It's about focusing on what matters. This has been somewhat of a long evolution here in our organization, but we are in a position right now which allows us to be pretty efficient in this process. And at the end of the day, there are some principles for good KPI dashboard measurement, and that is that you want to focus on what matters. You also want drivers, not outcome, and you want to keep it simple. In our companies, as you know, it can become very complex. We can become overwhelmed by details, by numerous problems. And at the end of the day, our role is to ensure that we focus on the key issues. And that is also part of the role of the CFO and his teams. So let me talk to you a little bit about dynamic forecasting. Unfortunately, the top of the slide is cut here, but dynamic forecasting is a tool which facilitates discipline and execution. So it's a process which is supported by a tool. And basically, as you see here, it's a cycle. It starts with assumptions which help with the development of plans, whether they're volume, activities, P&Ls, and provide a formalized forecast. Now, through this tracking, we measure progress, and the progress is looked at and measured and discussed and debated and provided to the key decision makers in the organization in a very transparent way. And what it's all about is measuring gaps between where we'd like to be and where we are. And based on these gaps, we want to put action plans in place. And action plans you could think are relevant for the decision makers, but no, CFOs and their teams are what I call this morning in a separate meeting co-pilots. That is, I think, one of the key attributes of our finance people is that we co-lead the organization. And as such, we've got insights, we've got tools, we've got information which we can leverage to make good decisions in the company. And obviously, this dynamic forecasting process is a cycle and a continuous process. So, what does this dynamic forecasting do? I'd like to talk a little bit about this gap analysis concept. The gap analysis would be focused on two things. One is the forecast, which I would define as what the future will look like. And this we compare to what the target or the planning is, which is what we would like the future to look like. And if I take a very simple example, if our plan or our target is a growth of 4% and a profit of 13%, when we put a forecast together, we obviously want to look at something which is a reflection of the future based on most recent and realistic assumptions. So a forecast exercise is not a wishful thinking exercise. It's about hard facts. And it's not about pleasing the management. In some instances, I've seen finance teams who've been basically showing a pretty rosy picture of the forecast. And as such, the company has missed some key issues which they could have addressed early on in the process. So I share all this because at the end of the day, we have to acknowledge the gap there between where we'd like to be and where we think we're going to end up based on the assumptions we're using. And this gap is very important, and our role as CFOs is to ensure that we put this gap on the table. You know, there's this expression which says, you want to put the skunk on the table. There's something smelling bad which no one really wants to talk about. Let's clear out the air and put that skunk on the table and talk about the issues. This is where it happens. If you don't address the issues from the get-go, your company is going to be in a bad situation. And, sorry. You know, again, this sounds very simple, but to ensure that people comply with this approach requires for people in the organization to have the right mindset, and finance, again, has a role to play in this type of process. Another key attribute of our DI process is that this process is a rolling 18-month forecast, and you do not limit yourself to the year end. Trying to put something together here which gives you an idea of what happens when you just focus on the typical 12-month period. You basically forecast till the year end, and suddenly you discover that if a new year starts, what you want to do is look beyond the year end. Hence our focus on an 18-month rolling. And that is something which has helped us so far in anticipating issues and addressing some business challenges we've had and experienced over the past. So I've gone through some of these concepts. Maybe just a recap here around planning processes which drive strong performance management. I mentioned earlier the long-term strategy, obviously a key step. But this dynamic forecasting process, which I mentioned earlier, drives transparency in our business, and it allows all of our team members and business decision makers to have a full understanding of what the status of the performance is. And it engages dialogue, it engages action planning, which we CFOs are part of. So, again, this gap concept is one which sounds very simple, but to put in practice, you need to make sure that people have the right mindset and address the issues which are on the table. And this type of approach is certainly facilitated with a root cause type of analysis. I mean, often we have a tendency of focusing on metrics and measures, and we look at the measures, but we don't fully understand what's driving the measure. That type of approach in our discussions, in our meetings, is very, very key. And it basically allows you to focus on the right things. Now, obviously, again, as finance professionals, we have a key role to play here. And I would say that in my experience, based on the different companies I've worked with at Nestle, we've had over time the ability to move in this direction, make sure that the overall organization understands how finance can provide this type of platform to ensure that decision making is done at a more proactive level. Maybe going to finish with this last slide. Finance drives business opportunities by embracing the role of a co-pilot. It all starts with a platform, and we've addressed some of these items earlier in the discussion from the panel, but on the left-hand side of the page, you'll see that obviously we need clearly strong business metrics. We need to have a very strong, robust data set, numbers, accounting, reporting, costing, and a solid application architecture, ISIT. And this platform helps provide business information to the organization, and the finance organization leverages this for business decision support. I think we talked earlier about the fact that finance people digest the information. We have a lot of information available to us. How do we make sure that we leverage the right information and makes it actionable to the people in the business? That is very, very much a key concept. And to do this, you need the right people as well. The people are basically the assets in your organization who are going to make this happen. focus we have on ensuring that our people are being developed